59.
Under PPT. This is not a program.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome back to this international webinar on cooperativism, self-management, and decentralized development. We are entering the second day of the webinar. Yesterday we had a wonderful time. Thanks to all for participating and attending in it. Thanks to all. Today is a special day for us. This is the 157th birthday of a great social reformist of Kerala, Sri Ayyankali, who fought for universal education, employment, freedom to have resources, freedom to move around for travel, freedom for travel, and freedom for even dressing as one wishes. It is his 157th birthday, and as you will all know, our coordinator of this, or the motive behind this webinar itself, Professor Joseph Tharamangalam, is now the professor at the chair for Ayyankali for social transformation. So for us, this is a very important day. And now we move on to the webinar proper. We have with us Professor Jeevan Kumar, who is the honorary professor of the Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University in Karnataka in India. We will have Professor Ole Tornquist, who was there with us yesterday, talking on the comparative notes and on the pros and cons of decentralization in view of the corona. We have Steve Friedman, who talks about the cure remains a symptom, subnational government, democracy and development in South Africa. He's from the University of Johannesburg. We have Dr. Ken Harilal, who is from the professor at the Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum, as well as he's the member of Kerala State Planning Board in India. And Professor Sanal Mohan, who talks on citizenship and social sufferings in the context of COVID-19. Dr. Harilal actually talks about the democratic decentralization in Kerala, a critique of recent experience. And Dr. Sanal Mohan talks about citizenship and social sufferings in the context of COVID-19. Professor Sanal Mohan is from Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, Kerala. And we have Professor Sunil Ray, who is the former director of the A.N. Sinha Institute, who talks about employment creation at decentralized level through construction of niche structure and promotion of self-organization. Without much introduction, I actually hand over the session to Professor Jeevan Kumar, who will now chair the session, this session on decentralized governance and development in comparative perspective. Over to Professor Jeevan Kumar.
Thank you, Dr. Elamon. It's indeed a pleasure to be chairing a very important session. It's a privilege given the galaxy of scholars who are making their presentations at this session. This is a continuation of the last session of yesterday. The theme is the same, decentralized governance and development from a comparative perspective. So without much ado, each of the paper presenters, according to the program, is given 15 minutes each. So my job, I will not say anything at this point of time. I will request the first panelist, Professor Ole Tornquist, to make his presentation. He will get 15 minutes. Likewise, each of the others will also get 15 minutes each. At the end of that, and after the question and answer session, I would like to make some concluding remarks. So may I now request Professor Tornquist to make his presentation?
Thank you very much. I have to all the participants, I just sent a PowerPoint if you want to, you can have a look at it later. The title is Comparative Notes on the Pros and Cons of Decentralization in View of the Corona. The international debate on how to come to terms with COVID-19 has largely focused on the effect of national strategies with regard to more or less drastic lockdowns. Sweden, for one, has opted for limited lockdowns in selective sector and specific recommendations on work from home, physical distancing, extreme hygiene, etc. Citizens have been expected to respect the recommendations on the basis of trust in evidence-based transparent policies. Neighboring countries, by contrast, such as Norway and Finland, have instead imposed radical lockdowns and compulsory regulations. The national outcomes have certainly been quite different. Socioeconomically and in terms of employment, Sweden has done comparatively well. This is much thanks to not having closed down the primary schools and childcare. Moreover, ordinary people, especially those of some age, have largely respected the public recommendations. But even if one compensates for the early hard-to-handle arrival of the pandemic in Sweden, as compared to the neighbors, there have been disturbingly high numbers of deaths in this old heartland country of good public health and welfare. Most importantly, it is clear by now that the effects vary in subnational regions as well as in sectors, and that different national strategies may not be the main explanatory factor. Of special interest for us today is that decentralized governance is one of these more vital factors. And remarkably, it has often been a drawback in Sweden. The troubles relate primarily to the governance of public health. Our regionally managed hospitals have muddled through, but at the expense of patients with other illnesses and with huge problems in terms of shortage of skilled personnel, plus absence of medicines and even basic protective equipment. The supply chains of market-driven lean production and administration has almost collapsed. Moreover, the regions have not been able to implement extensive testing and tracking. It wasn't even clear who would carry out the various tasks. Decentralization, along with poor coordination and neoliberal new public management, are the obvious explanatory factors. These are also the main reasons for the extremely high numbers of deaths among elderly people in residential homes and home care. But what is more, the even more localized management of this care for the elderly by the municipalities themselves and private and cooperative institutions supposedly supervised by the municipalities have added to the appalling outcome. It's not so easy that privatization is a major explanation for this. There are rules and regulations for minimum standards, and as indicated, the municipalities are responsible for supervision. Moreover, there have been serious mismanagement in the services provided by the municipalities themselves, including the shortage of equipment and the hiring of poorly trained temporary personnel. In short, the globally celebrated Swedish model of public welfare, based on social democratic social pacts between unions and employers, effective implementation by central government, and since ages, independent regional and local governments, has cracked. Worst, people thus begin to lose trust in it, and those with sufficient economic resources search for private solutions. In sharp contrast, Kerala seems to have done extremely well so far in handling COVID-19, much thanks to the democratic decentralization pushed by the public action introduced from the late 1980s until the early 2000s. Along with state government regulations and testing of migrants returning home, local governments and health authorities supported by civil society have obviously enabled effective localized testing, tracking, and lockdowns, in addition to decent support for the well-being of those affected. However, it seems to me from reports in media that the economic consequences also call for extensive stimulation programs, far beyond the capacity of the local governments. Similarly, the local actors may be less able to handle the increased spread of COVID-19 in larger communities than in specific local clusters. This reminds me of the results from mine and other studies of the effects from the late 1980s until the 2000s to renew the Kerala model. Decentralization was crucial to create space for new development initiatives between government and civil society, as well as between farmers and laborers, or more broadly between labor, capital. Thus, parties' clientelistic relations with numerous interest and issue organizations to gain votes and loyalists were somewhat reduced. The most obvious positive outcome, however, is that there are now functioning local governments which people can turn to and state institutions can cooperate with. This has been proven by their vital role in handling COVID-19. But already in the initial decentralization and popular planning campaign days, there were also challenges. Today, the shortage at that point of time of social audits may have been addressed, as well as some of the challenges of combining direct and representative democracy, plus participatory and professional governance. But what about all the vital problems that can't be solved in panchayat meetings? It seems to me that the challenges today of COVID-19, in terms of fighting the pandemic as such, as well as the handling of economic and social consequences, remind of the previous insufficiencies of localized governance. In my analysis, one of these deficiencies was that since the villages are increasingly open economies, those active inside the villages cannot be expected to also take responsibility for their residents active outside the villages. Hence, there must also be firm links to welfare state programs, which primarily, moreover, need to be universal, not targeted, so that middle classes will feel there is something in it for them too. This is exactly what happened in Scandinavia during the transition from a mainly agricultural to industrial economy in the late 19th and early 20th century. Social Democrats added universal welfare state programs to community and civil society efforts and popular movement self-help, including cooperatives. Redistribution to the benefit of the poor had to rather be fostered through taxation. Moreover, effective local development planning must consider both public and private investments and links to the outside economy. In Scandinavia, this was facilitated by social pacts and the participation of national organizations in national policy planning. If something similar doesn't happen, one consequence may be similar to that in China when the regime was unable to connect the people's communes. The matter was left to the market, which nourished collusion between politicians, party people, and business persons. Similarly, local communities are difficult places in which to combine the preoccupations of civil society activists on the one hand and union and other organizations that are not confined to the local territories, but related to production and workplaces in many areas. The challenges in Kerala, I think, resound thus the recent Swedish experience that extensive public welfare along with decentralization isn't enough. There must also be efficient links and coordination between the institutions and actors involved at different levels. And there must be democratic systems to handle that. There were elements of democratic partnership governance in Sweden involving government and its authorities, capital and labor, plus issue and self-management organizations, but it is more clear now than ever after the failures in combating COVID-19 in Sweden that this has degenerated. Similarly, the joint organizations for regions and municipalities in Sweden, which negotiate with the central government, has developed strong special interests of the municipalities in their role as employers. Bluntly speaking, they strive for low wages and temporary employment of often unskilled personnel. So the unresolved issue is how the democratic partnership governance can be reinvented with us. I trust that there are ambitions in Kerala to scale up local planning within frameworks set by the State Planning Board. But as already indicated, there must also be democratic ways of including non-public actors from capital as well as labor. Without trustworthy and efficient democratic linkages, the quests for authoritarian regimes to rather build stronger states and impose those links are likely to increase. And those quests, unfortunately, are already there globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tonquist. That was a very good comparative perspective that we got. Primarily Sweden as a Nordic country and Kerala. The lessons that you have drawn at the end of your paper, I think, are very important, and we could take that up during discussion time. It was a very perceptive concluding lessons that you have drawn. Countries may have extensive public welfare systems. Countries may boast or pride themselves upon the systems of decentralization. But would this be enough to tackle disasters like pandemics that we're currently going through? And as a fallout of this observation, you have even recommended what needs to be done by countries to be able to handle pandemics like COVID-19. You have suggested that there is need for trustworthy and efficient democratic linkages. That's an important point that you're making. You're also suggesting the need for more effective coordination between institutions, between actors. So we may have systems in place, but if coordination is missing, if trust is missing, if democratic linkages are missing, well, we could be in trouble. And I think both Sweden and Kerala perhaps need to look at this more carefully. And the last point that you also made is extremely important. We need to reinvent democratic partnership governance. Thank you, Dr. Tonquist, Professor Tonquist, once again. We now move on to the second panelist, Professor Steve Friedman. Sir, your time starts now.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. Just one issue which hopefully won't be necessary to invoke, but I did tell Joe a couple of days ago that if the session goes beyond 9 o'clock Indian time, more than 5 minutes or so, I'm going to have to excuse myself because unfortunately I have another commitment on Zoom shortly after this one. Hopefully that won't be necessary. I must say that having listened to several of the presentations so far, I'm tempted to tear up my abstract and talk about the South African response to COVID, which I think might be more interesting. But I will be disciplined and I will stick to the remit I was given by the organizers, which hopefully will be relevant, and hopefully there will be an opportunity to raise the issue of responses to COVID later on in the proceedings. My presentation is called "The Symptom is Still the Cure." The cure is actually still the symptom, because of course one of the themes which has already emerged very strongly in our discussions, and which is very much part of the Kerala experience, is the idea that decentralization, that democratic decentralization is progressive, that it empowers people living in poverty, that it enables societies to address poverty, inequality, and other social challenges more effectively. And in a sense, South Africa is a cautionary tale for that particular perspective. I have quite a good deal of sympathy for that perspective, but I think that the South African story, in a sense, warns against, if you like, an indiscriminate reliance on decentralization. Because in effect, the South African story is the precise opposite of many of the examples we've heard so far. local government in South Africa and provincial government in South Africa are not in any way vehicles for the empowerment of the poor. They are not in any way vehicles for dealing with poverty and inequality or for progressive social policy. They are very often vehicles of accumulation. There's a context to this, and the context to this is twofold, both of which lie in South African history. The first one is certain aspects of the fight against apartheid. One of the features of the apartheid system, which reduced 90% of South Africans to second-class or third-class citizens, was that both regional and local governments were used as instruments of subordination, as means of controlling Black people rather than giving them any sort of meaningful representation. And as a result of that, the assumption throughout the spectrum of the various organizations which fought apartheid, which fought on behalf of the majority of the South African citizenry or the South African residents at that stage, was that lower levels of government, in inverted commas, regional government and local government, were instruments of privilege, were ways of preventing change occurring. This view was strengthened during the negotiation process when the negotiators representing the white government at that stage presented proposals in which local government could be used quite unashamedly to protect white privilege. That was defeated. That was not part of the rules which were adopted. But the point I'm obviously making is that decentralization, there's a very deep-rooted sense in South Africa, among those who fought for, among those who feel that they try to represent the aspirations of most South Africans, that decentralized government is a way of entrenching privilege. This has softened to some extent over the last 25 years, but it's still very present. I mean, for example, we have 9 provinces, and there are constant suggestions from various parts of not only the ruling African National Congress, but parties to its left, that provincial government should be abolished because it's seen as a vehicle for patronage and corruption rather than for popular empowerment and representation. The second aspect, which explains why very often those perceptions are entirely valid, why provincial and local government very often is precisely what the skeptics say it is the nature of our transition from apartheid. And the key feature of that transition for this purpose is that in 1994, when a new constitution was adopted, finally enfranchising the entire adult population, really all that agreement did was resolve the citizenship issue. Now, obviously, that was a necessary condition for any sort of change. We couldn't think seriously of a new society unless the citizenship issue was resolved by the extension of the franchise and rights to everybody. But that is all that was resolved in 1994. The economy was not addressed in 1994. The social institutions of the society were not addressed. And the result of that is that 25 years after the end of apartheid, there are very severe barriers to Black people who want to enjoy the benefits of the mainstream market economy. It's a highly concentrated economy. It operates on very exclusionary networks. And if you are an up-and-coming young person or an up-and-coming person of any age who wants to get on in the world, it is very difficult to do it through the marketplace. Lower down the scale, the social scale, people who aspire to a middle-class lifestyle very often realize very quickly that because the nature of the economy is not changed, they will not enjoy that middle-class lifestyle through the marketplace. And so they attach themselves to politics and government in the hope that it can yield the resources which the marketplace doesn't offer. And this has created, over the last 25 years, the development of local and regional networks, which really exist to use local and provincial government in order to access resources in the first instance to propel people into the middle class. But in the second instance, if you're able to get hold of those resources, to use those resources to buy the loyalty of other people who are trying to get into the middle class. I very often try to illustrate how local government works for most South Africans by pointing out that in the areas in which the majority of South Africans live, people living in poverty, in low-income settlements and slums, that the difference between being a local councillor and losing your seat is the difference between being middle class and poor. And given that reality, a person in that position is obviously going to be guided by very different calculations about what they're doing in local government than they are by the traditional idea that you're supposed to be serving your fellow citizens. These networks have become very deeply entrenched. They lead very often to violence, so that in various parts of the country at various times, you have hired assassins who kill people. The media tends to report these very often as a result of internecine battles in the governing party. But in fact, the evidence shows very clearly that what is happening there is corrupt networks are eliminating people who stand in the way of corruption. So that if you threaten to report the corruption, if you don't cooperate, then there is some chance, unfortunately, that you may lose your life as a consequence. Given this reality, it is not surprising that confidence in local government and in provincial government is very low among the citizenry. The way in which people react to the reality that I'm describing, the corruption and the fact that local government and regional government are very often vehicles for networks trying to accumulate both resources and power, is that it's not very often recognized by South Africans as well as everybody else that street protests in the areas in which people living in poverty live in South Africa, street protests, very often they get very poorly reported by the media, who are not really particularly interested in them unless they interfere with the daily routines of middle-class people. But when they are reported, they're very often reported as rather strange and exotic events, which is a bit odd because the media sometimes have difficulty in explaining why they report these strange and exotic events on almost a daily basis. The reality is that if you look at South Africa's trajectory over since the mid-1970s, South Africa has experienced a very high level of street protest continually from the mid-1970s until today, with a brief interruption between 1994 and 1997, when people believed that the society was changing. So what you have is almost as a routine occurrence, you have local government very often acting in the way I've described, perceived by people in slums and low-income settlements to be behaving in that way. And the response is to demonstrate and protest. However, that is not an avenue to change either. And the reason it's not an avenue to change is that the protest is very rarely organized, in the sense that it's very rarely backed up by organized groups which can make demands, negotiate them, and win concessions for people living in poverty. In fact, very often, not always, but very often the protests are organized by politicians who are trying to get in on the corruption networks that I'm talking about, because if you can mobilize protest and establish that you have a constituency, then your chances of getting on the lists which get local government positions and through them opportunities to accumulate increase. Now, that obviously does not mean that the people who are protesting do not have real grievances. They have very real grievances. It doesn't even mean that the people who are protesting are being manipulated by the people who organize the protests. There's very interesting ethnographic work done on these issues, which shows very clearly that the people who are protesting are perfectly well aware of the motives of those who are organizing the protests. However, they feel very angry about their situation, and they feel that they ought to protest in order to, in the hope, often the vain hope, that they will gain a voice and be able to be heard. But the point that needs to be stressed is that this could, in principle, lead to a very exciting movement for change if it led people to organize, to demand changes, and to have any real prospects of winning some of those changes. But for the reasons I've described, that does not happen. Now, what are we to make of this reality? Is it a purely South African reality? No, I don't think it is a purely South African reality. Does it mean, therefore, that I'm endorsing the South African consensus and saying that decentralization is simply a way of entrenching privilege, and that if we want to change society, we must simply concentrate on national government? That would, of course, be an extraordinarily odd argument to make in Kerala, which has demonstrated very clearly quite precisely the opposite. And certainly in the context that, besides all Kerala's other achievements, the context of COVID, Kerala's performance compared to that of many other parts of India speaks for itself. So no, I'm not making that argument at all. But I think it's very important, and I think that's the key lesson of the South African experience. It's very important when we look at decentralization, if we present democratic decentralization as an option, that we realize that first of all, that there are various varieties of democratic decentralization, or allegedly democratic decentralization. So that very often you have very conservative versions of decentralization. And what these conservative versions of decentralization do is that they propose devolving power to the power networks which develop locally. So the reality I've been describing is one in which corrupt networks which exercise power are influential, and some kind of radical sounding decentralization would simply empower those networks. So what we obviously need to, and maybe that's implicit in what everybody's saying, but I think that the South African example makes it explicit, that in effect, democratic decentralization is not simply a process of devolving power down to existing structures at the local level. If it's going to be democratic, if it's going to be empowering, if it's going to change lives, then it has to be about dismantling those power structures. And the presentation we had from Sadara last night, I think raised many of the issues which are relevant to this, the issues of how we deal with entrenched power networks at the local level, because that is a huge challenge. I think in a nutshell, it's necessary that we see democratic decentralization as an aspiration, as a project, if you like, as something which has to be built over time in often very difficult situations. Hopefully the situations in other parts of the world are not as difficult as they are in South Africa. But I think that the example that I presented you with has perhaps challenged us, or I would hope it would challenge us to look very carefully at the power structures at the local level and at the regional level, and to engage in those issues which were raised last night, in examination of how those power structures might begin to be challenged, and how they have been challenged successfully in some parts of the world, including, it seems to me, Kerala. How one builds that project of ensuring that decentralization is a route to democracy, to greater power, rather than simply a way of entrenching the power, the sway of the elites who are so dominant at the moment. I'm not sure whether my time is up, but I'm sure it probably is, so yes. I'll stop there.
Yes, yes, sir. Thank you, Professor Friedman. I hope you'll be able to stay on, beyond the time that we have indicated. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions for you. But thank you. I
do have this problem, but maybe 5 minutes or so. The problem is I didn't see the program before. I only got the program 2 days ago, and I have this obligation which I can't get out of. So if we go on to 9:10, otherwise beyond that I have a problem.
Okay, sir. So for those of you in the audience who have questions for Professor Friedman, I think those questions should be asked to him first, so that we are able to relieve him at 9:10 sharp. Thank you, sir. The key lessons that you identified are very important to need for us to look at democratic decentralization from a comparative perspective. The point that you made about the need to see the democratic decentralization as a project, as a work in progress, because South Africa seems to be having a lot of problems there. Thank you very much for your presentation. We now move on to the third paper presenter, Professor K.N. Harilal. Are you ready, sir?
Yes, yes.
Over to you, Professor Harilal. Your time starts now.
Professor Jeevan Kumar, fellow panelists, and friends. First of all, I should thank Mahatma Gandhi University, Professor Joe Taramangalam, Kila, and Dr. Joy Elman for making this webinar possible. And I believe that this is going to be a major contribution to the local governments, new set of local governments that are going to come soon. We are going to have elections to the local governments soon, and we will also have elections to the state assembly. Now, this is a very useful context where we should be having a review of our experience over the last 25 years in Kerala. And this is an opportunity for learning from the experience in other countries as well. And I believe that the presentations here, even in this session made by Professor Ole and Professor Stephen Friedman from South Africa, both these presentations carry valuable lessons to be taken very seriously in the context of planning for the next 5 years and ahead. Now, we are used to such learning exercises. We organized an international seminar after the first 5 years of People's Campaign in Kerala. And similar exercises happened at different intervals. And immediately before the present government came to power, we had several such sessions. And we learned from such debates, such discussions, and even controversies in Kerala. And we also had the advantage of many senior scholars from different parts of the world coming and studying Kerala's experiment. And we have tried to make use of these lessons in our process. And I'm going to speak about such an exercise which we undertook immediately before the present government in Kerala came to power. See, from that exercise, where we reviewed all the existing studies and where we had very detailed discussions with activists here, etc., we sort of listed out many issues that will have to be addressed. And one major problem that came up in the discussion was this problem of bureaucratic capture of the whole exercise of democratic decentralization in Kerala. Over time, we have accumulated all kinds of procedures, rules, regulations, which really made democracy almost impossible at the local level. These rules and regulations were killing all the initiatives from the local level. It was a major disincentive for participation, for local level discussions and contribution to participatory decision making. I don't want to get into this problem of bureaucratic in detail because we have only 15 minutes. But I'll illustrate the issue by giving one or two instances. In fact, over time, we had this problem. We never used to have a plan in the beginning of a year to be implemented. We never used to make the plan in advance. Instead, we used to start the process of making the plan at the beginning of the year. Then almost 3/4 of the year will be taken for the process of making the plan. Then we will get only the last quarter for implementation. And most of the money will be spent during the last 3 years, 3 states, 3 months, and then a kind of bunging happens. Bunging of expenditure happens in March. Almost 60% of the money is spent in March. March is the final year of the financial year in India. And again, there is bunging towards the last few weeks of the year. Now, we decided that this should be changed because it was creating problems. It was making the whole exercise of planning by the people at the local level meaningless. And then we introduced many changes in the process of planning, in the methodology of planning. And now we have a system by which we have the plan ready before the beginning of the year. And the process starts in the current year, so that most of it is done and we are through, ready with the plan for the forthcoming year. Now, this exercise was an elaborate one. It was just not just an administrative process, because it involved participation at all levels. And we had taken suggestions from activists and local government leaders, and we could achieve this. And this made a lot of difference, because if you have a system where all the money is spent during the last 2 months, and particularly in the final month, then the whole process of local planning becomes a kind of distribution of money. It doesn't matter whether the project is in the area of animal husbandry or paddy cultivation or something else. Everywhere, it's a question of distribution of some money devolved to the local government or made at the local level. That money is being distributed to different projects. So it's not an organic process. If it is, if the money is made available right from the beginning, and if the whole year-round process of paddy cultivation or animal husbandry, etc., if it can be taken into account, then there will be good results. And in fact, this is what happened over the last 5 years. And now it has become, planning and implementation has become very, very organic. And this is giving results, particularly in some areas where participatory planning was doing very badly. In fact, the literature, all the studies on Kerala's planning, they show the commendable performance in the area of services, social welfare, infrastructure, etc. Right from the beginning, we were in Kerala, we were doing quite well in those areas. But the picture was quite dismal when it came to goods producing sectors, agriculture, animal husbandry, allied areas, industry, etc. We were not able to really do well, and the state was doing very badly in the goods producing sectors. Now this trend is reversed in a significant manner now. The plan of the local government is ready in the beginning of the year itself. It's year-round planning, year-round expenditure, and this is borne out by the data, monthly data of expenditure, and this is also clearly reflected in the performance of agriculture, animal husbandry, etc. Now, we had a problem of continuous decline in the area of paddy land in Kerala, cultivated area. And then we had this problem of continuous decline in the animal population. And all these things got reversed in a significant manner. And large number of model panchayats emerged in the area of goods producing sectors. And this, in fact, got reflected in other areas also. Of course, infrastructure, we have been doing quite well earlier also. But in the area of old age care, in the area of palliative care, in the area of healthcare in general, in the area of education, significant improvement came about because of this methodological change. So now, this question of bureaucratic capture, probably I'll have to explain a little more, because there is a tendency on the part of the state to incorporate lower levels of governments and participatory process into the state machinery. They'll convert the participatory spaces as appendages of the state machinery. And that is against the principle of participation and struggle, which Kerala model has been sustaining from from the beginning, even before the beginning of the people's planning.
Not able to hear you, sir.
Some problem.
There is
Yes.
some technical snag at this end. Let's wait for a couple of
Okay.
minutes.
Okay.
Professor Harilal is trying to rejoin.
Okay. Okay, we'll wait. Able to reach him?
Professor Harilal has suggested that we can continue with the session, and he will rejoin in the meantime.
So we go to the next speaker, is it?
Yeah. We can go to the next speaker and then come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Sanal Mohan, are you ready? If Professor Sanal Mohan is ready, we can have him making his presentation. Yes. Yes, sir. Over to you.
Good evening. Professor Jeevan Kumar, Professor Friedman, Professor Tornquist, Professor Harilal, and other panelists and colleagues and friends. When I was asked to be part of this webinar and asked to think about a theme on which I will present my thoughts, I suggested that I shall speak on citizenship and social sufferings in the context of COVID-19. That was a theme that I had suggested. Now, let me go to this problem without losing much time. So when I thought of talking about social sufferings, so I had in the back of my mind, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I had in the back of my mind some kind of social sciences writings in this area, in the area of social sufferings. And much of them would talk about social sufferings caused by, for example, wars, famine, genocide, and other forms of social oppressions that might have existed historically or that continue to exist even today. We are also familiar with the argument that the weight of the world is borne by actually, the underprivileged people who are oppressed and so on. So, for want of time, I'm not going into this sort of literature, but my arguments are informed by this particular kind of literature where sufferings are, talked about, where social sufferings along with bodily sufferings are seen quite significant. And also, scholars have been talking about the question of pain and what are the ways in which social scientists or specialists in history, sociology, social anthropology, etc., could talk about pain. In fact, all of these have become really significant. Our reflections on these questions have become quite significant in the context of COVID-19. And I also understand certain strands in the history of diseases and medicine where also people talk about the need for looking at such experiences as pandemic in the context of COVID-19 or historical forms of other diseases from something like, looking at things using this idea of a history from below, so that there is another strand of thinking, especially in relation to diseases, their histories, etc. So these sort of intellectual traditions actually try to look at social suffering. So while this is, as I said, in the back of my mind, I also wanted to look at how citizenship gets inflected in this whole thing. And since we don't have much time, I just signpost some of those arguments.
You can.
Although we can think of citizenship as, usually citizenship is thought about as a very formal thing. But for these evening discussions, as my fellow panelists and others listening to me would know very well, that we also need to bring in the questions of social citizenships and social citizenship, the idea of social citizenship and other forms of other forms of arguments or ideas and other forms of imagining citizenship. But for the moment, I'm more concerned with these questions of social citizenship. And now this has become quite significant because in 2018 floods context, we tried to study this question in Kerala, and we found that the responses to the floods, rehabilitation and the manner in which the responses of the people to 2018 floods were influenced by their ideas of citizenship. And in practice, the lack of the notion of social citizenship, which had caused tremendous problems to underprivileged people, especially from Dalit communities and Adivasi communities, when it came to claiming compensation or getting rescued or rehabilitated and so on. So therefore, I argue that social citizenship remains a major problem even in a state like Kerala. Now quickly to other aspects of the pandemic. I wish to say that, for example, we had close to 4 million laborers from other parts of India, especially from the northeastern states and eastern states of India who have been working here. And obviously, there was some kind of positive interventions by the state government sometime back to introduce labor regulations that might give certain amount of protection to the the laborers from other states who are working in Kerala. But the fact of the matter is that in Kerala society, where the labor of this migrant laborers are very, very significant because they have even reached the remote villages of Kerala, remote corners of Kerala, far away from the district headquarters or big towns and so on. So these people's labor becomes absolutely important. But I personally doubt whether in Kerala society, these migrant laborers who are from elsewhere in India are treated as citizens. Or in other words, I argue that there is a lack of social citizenship when it comes. The idea of social citizenship is a huge deficit, or sometimes it's not there when it comes to dealing with the migrant laborers. Now, how does it impact the everyday life of these people? We know that. Now, I just take a few cases. For instance, it was during the lockdown that the migrant laborers began to be viewed as an immediate threat by the Kerala society. The people in Kerala began to feel that most people are inside their homes. They are practicing all this hand washing, social distancing, using of sanitizers, and so on. But you have after a while, thousands of people on the streets, they are walking in the street demanding that there should be conveyance for them to go back to their villages. And I'm sure that even in small towns in Kerala, these people came out in force and they were demanding that they should, as it happened elsewhere in India, in big cities. So these people demanded that they should be allowed to go home. And what was the response of the state? The state, meanwhile, was doing whatever it could. In the sense that state agencies were pressed into service. There was a lot of, support. Supply of provisions and things of that kind, and even food that was served. Kudumbashree and so many other NGOs were pressed into service. All of these things were happening, but yet these people wanted to go home. Now, in Kerala, in spite of what is being talked about as a so-called, better society, I disagree with many of the arguments people present about Kerala. You will soon realize that the response of the people were very bad. So it was treated as a law and order problem. And in many places, ordinary people also joined, and also, some of the activists of the parties, they also joined the police to beat up these people. Now, they didn't understand the fact that in the context of this COVID, in the context of the pandemic, and in the fear of death and all that, these people, it was quite natural for anybody, and especially for the people who are separated from their families, to return home. So the image of home, the idea, and what is being informed by the image of home, the particular mentality of people which really demanded that they should be sent back home, was completely missed out to the Kerala society, to the state, and the police was pressed into action, and we have seen on television screens how these poor people were beaten up. Now, the situation was not very different in other parts of India. So we have seen this thousands and thousands of people. And of course, it ran into millions subsequently, forming kind of caravans, trudging through the highways which they themselves helped to pave, leaving this, the kind of traumatic life in the small huts, or in a small room, one-room accommodation which they were given by their employers, and they have been moving. And we know that those who started from the south of India would be beaten up. So you imagine those who have started from Kerala would be beaten up in Tamil Nadu, and as they passed by, what was showered in a democratic sense, in a democratic way, was this physical torture. Now the question is, did ever any of these people, the government of India or the state governments where these people had worked, ever thought of these as citizens? These people are citizens with inalienable rights as human beings. Now forget about human beings. They should have been thought of as at least living beings. So this idea of treating humans not as garbage, that was completely absent in India during the COVID-19. Therefore, I argue that it's not just a deficit. It was absolute lack of an idea of citizenship, which led to this human suffering. Now, a few days ago, famous social scientist Divankar Gupta wrote a piece in the Hindu, in which he was talking about the desire of the workers to go back home, connected with the whole idea of, rituals that are to be performed when one is dead. It was connected with mortuary rites in that sense, as the kind of category which the anthropologists could use. He was arguing that many of these young or middle-aged men or even elder men who are working as who fall in the category of migrant laborers, they wanted to go home because they feared that a death which has not been, served with religious rites would become a real burden for their soul. Now, my point is slightly different from there. While understanding the North Indian psyche, he might be putting forward a better argument. My argument is that the idea of home becomes absolutely important. The idea of a private sphere and home and the security that the home offers, which was much more than perhaps the rites of passage which one would undergo after one's death. And nobody would know, what happens when someone is dead, because the person who died would never know what happens to him. Yet, what I want to argue is that, in spite of all these ideas about, how to deal with the situation, which subsequently the government, both the central and state governments came out with, there was a complete absence of this notion of citizenship. Now, the Supreme Court, in fact, the story says that some of these NGOs and civil rights activists, they approached the Supreme Court And when then the Supreme Court came out with a wonderful hearing of this, and then Tushar Mehta, who is one of those attorneys, I mean, for the government of India, he goes and says that there is nothing happening because all these newspapers and television, channels were showing millions of people marching across the highways in India. But the Supreme Court was convinced of the fact that nothing was happening. And a few weeks ago, then the Supreme Court came out with a fantastic kind of intervention by saying that these people are suffering. Now look at the kind of sufferings that the people have undergone. We read about a girl who walked from Telangana to Chhattisgarh, and before reaching home, nearly around 60 kilometers away from home, she was 12 years old. She fell dead. And there were similar kinds of untold miseries heaped on ordinary folks, and whose labor actually, whose sweat and blood actually, brought up all these big cities, facilities that the cities boast in India, neoliberal cities. Now, so what I want to suggest is the fact that the neoliberal economy or the state machinery which supported it, or even the private capital, nobody ever had any idea of what these people are undergoing. They definitely knew that these people are undergoing suffering because they were themselves the people who withheld their wages, who made their life difficult, and so on. And in fact, in Tamil Nadu, we hear about the situation of people being prevented from moving out because they thought that once the lockdown situation is over, there won't be laborers to work. So therefore, this neoliberal economy and also the state machinery that works in tandem with all the machineries of the state that work in tandem with this sort of political policy, economic agents. So they were the ones, along with the support of the state, which eventually treated these people as garbage. So therefore, I want to signpost the whole idea of not just social citizenship, political citizenship and so on, as a very central issue when it comes to sufferings, social suffering. And now this is not a suffering which happens, like, for example, this classical story of that we read in the book of Job. So where you have infliction, where a person is affected by diseases and so on. So there you have a different agent. There are two different agencies at play, the God and the Satan. Now here, all these agencies are rolled into one, the state and the neoliberal state. And that one was creating this tremendous amount of sufferings for people. So now the question is, how do we analyze it? Now, I can give you many examples from Kerala also, where people deny that this sort of things were happening. But in fact, if we follow on an everyday, the record of the records of that period on an everyday basis, especially the kind of data that we have in the public domain, it would tell us that the situation was not very good here either. So one last point I want to mention is that when people were, when 10 or 11 people were huddled in small rooms where they are told that they need to practice social distancing and so on, where it is absolutely impossible. A room itself becomes something like inside of the room becomes something like an inferno situation. Now, within this kind of situation that, the state and other agencies were demanding that you need to, keep all these COVID protocols. Now, think about the unimaginable kind of sufferings that were created. And this was created largely because of the idea of citizenship was suspended to, the migrant laborers. This had been happening for a long time. Quite some time back, political scientist Partha Chatterjee had talked about how the citizenship rights of the migrant laborers were postponed forever in certain ways. So therefore, in COVID context, all these pre-existing inequalities became very, very powerful. And they all joined together to deny various forms of citizenship, which are very central to democratic life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sanal Mohan. We now have the last paper presenter in this panel, Professor Sunil Ray.
Dr. Harilal is back.
Okay, fine. So we'll have Professor Harilal to complete his paper. Then we'll have.
In fact, I will not take much time. I'm very sorry that
okay, sir.
got connectivity problem here.
Okay.
I'll just try to complete in 2-3 minutes so that now we have enough time for discussion. I was trying to explain how we were trying to learn the lessons from the past experience and studies, and how we were trying to overhaul the methodology of planning in Kerala, so that the question of bureaucratic capture can be addressed, so that democracy is made more meaningful in the local planning. And I was also trying to explain how it got reflected in the goods producing sectors particularly. Now, I should also mention some other aspects where we tried to change the process during the last 5 years. Most of the studies were mentioning about lack of sensitivity of the people's planning process towards urbanization problem. In fact, right from the beginning, we were having a uniform kind of approach towards planning in the villages, in rural areas, and in the urban areas. The planning methodology didn't really make much distinction between urban and rural development problems. We have tried to solve this issue by differentiating urban problems and trying to address urban problems in a different way. But that's one area where we need to really improve quite a lot in the coming years, because urban problems are really growing in Kerala. Urbanization is developing very fast. And we need to really address these issues in an efficient manner in the coming years. Then we have also tried to develop district plans in the state. It was originally thought that the district plans will be made in every district, which will help try to integrate the efforts at the local level. But unfortunately, this was not possible. This couldn't be done. And for the first time, we have evolved district plans in all the districts in Kerala. And it was a successful experiment in the sense local governments participated, people participated in a significant manner. And all the line departments of the government also participated in the exercise. And the district plans now certainly inform planning at the level of individual local governments, the rural local governments as well as urban local governments. And in the district plans, we have also tried to introduce the idea of spatial planning in a big way. The earlier plans didn't really bring this factor of spatial planning into the framework. In fact, the planning was focused mainly on socioeconomic aspects. That is true of state level planning as well. Now, the space is the importance of space is being brought into the picture in a significant way, and this is helping the disaster management plans in different local governments. In fact, now disaster management plans were made in most local governments in Kerala. That was done after the floods, but as probably some speakers would have mentioned earlier in yesterday's presentation, this helped local governments in a big way in the fight against COVID. I should also mention about one aspect which was probably mentioned by Ole. See the importance of higher structures of higher tiers of government, central government, state government line departments, and in the hierarchy of local governments, you have the district panchayats and block panchayats and the lower tier. The need to have integration among these different tiers of government. Now, in many areas, particularly in the area of goods producing sectors, we have a problem of atomization at the local level. Say, for example, in the case of agriculture, we have fragmentation of holdings and a kind of atomization of farming. The farmers are having scale disadvantages, which is creating problems in all agriculture-related areas like marketing, technology, etc. Now, higher tiers of government can certainly help the local governments in overcoming these difficulties. And during the last 5 years, we were trying to do this, encouraging district panchayats and block panchayats to take up complementary activities which help the rural local governments. Similarly, the missions, state level missions, also were an attempt to solve this problem of lack of integration, lack of coordination, and scale disadvantages. The missions like Ardram and the education mission, in all these cases, the local governments were helped in a big way by not only by making resources available, but also technology and other forms of help. But then there is this problem also when the missions work and when the campaigns dominate. There is this problem of reducing space for democracy at the local level. There should be a proper balance between state level missions, state level campaigns, and local initiatives. It's not a very easy balance to be achieved. This can be achieved only through praxis. But from our experience in Kerala, it's very clear that there is no point in romanticizing participatory democracy at the expense of representative structures at higher levels. In fact, we cannot think of democracy without incorporating the role of representative structures at higher levels. A right kind of combination between participatory structures at the local level and representative democracy institutions at higher level is very important. Take the case of any development sectors, even what Sanal presented here, the question of citizenship of migrant workers anywhere for that matter, in India or outside. See, the migrant workers, they are not voters of the local governments. They don't have it. It's very difficult for them to exercise their citizenship rights at the local level because they are not voters. The system doesn't really. The system is not sensitive to their citizenship rights. Now, to overcome this problem, in fact, the higher tiers of government will have to intervene, national government and the state governments. And in the COVID context, when we discuss the rights of migrant workers, in fact, it was the intervention from higher tiers that sort of ensured, that sort of tried to address some of the problems that Sanal was raising here. It is true that compared to other states in India, the situation in Kerala was far better. But there were disturbing instances in Kerala too. And public discussion, in fact, took place. And the state government had to step in a big way to address many of these issues mentioned here. So it's very important that we have a proper balance between structures of democracy, and it's particularly important in the context of neoliberal state and the kind of situation that we are going to have post-COVID. We can expect concentration of power globally and at the national level, and then when important things are being decided at the global level, when important consequential things are decided at the national level, there is no point in speaking about participatory structures, because they will not have much power to decide the destiny of local people. Whether it is agriculture, whether it is fighting COVID, whether it is inflation, whether it is unemployment. In fact, most of the things are being decided at the national level. And the more recent things are really disturbing, because in the name of COVID, everywhere in the world, national governments are printing money and expanding public debt to support the financial sector, the stock market. And inequality is growing like anything, probably surpassing all records, past historical records, as far as growth in inequality is concerned. So when such a thing is happening, we will have to be very careful about romanticizing local democracy and local planning. We should be aware of the limitations at the local level. This I'll stop. I'm sorry for giving you this problem of lack of connectivity. So.
Jeevan Kumar sir, you have to unmute.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Arilal. A very interesting observation you made at the end of your paper, that we shouldn't romanticize local democracy, local planning and all that. That was an interesting observation, and some of us may want you to clarify that a little more. Now we have Professor Sunil Ray speaking to us, last speaker. Sunil Ray, your time starts now.
Yeah. Professor Jeevan Kumar, distinguished participants and the panelists. More I hear the speakers from Kerala, their experiences, more I think that what I have been working on or writing is something more correct than what I thought. The purpose, actually the whole discourse on decentralized development, I'm taking that one to serious theoretical argument in economics. And the purpose for which I've taken up this exercise is to search for a way out to the problem of unemployment, the crisis that is growing at a frightening scale. Something at the decentralized level, how do we address the problem of unemployment? That is something which is my basic point, and on the basis of which I am trying to, and based on my experiences, my readings on the radical transformative initiatives taken all over the world, and some of the experiences that I keep hearing on Kerala. So I thought that I really should make a an attempt to really look for some theoretical argument. I'm making this attempt to theoretically argue that it is possible to bring about a breakthrough to this unemployment crisis only through structural transformation. Well, the structural transformation people always talked about. But here, what my argument is that this structural transformation that I am looking forward is not led by capital or global capitalism. It must be led by what I call construction of niche structure at the local level based on the evolutionary forces, laws of evolutionary biology. I'll speak about it later. The niche structure can appropriately bring about structural transformation. I further argue this can happen only within the framework of cohesive development, which is rooted in the principles of solidarity between humans on the one hand and humans on and the nature on the other. And all these things need to be looked at decentralized local level, at the local economic level. The question that has driven me to work on this is the problem on which I'm working now, a theoretical work. Now, why is it that I'm raising this question is that people have been working on unemployment, employment, this and that and all that, and the mainstream economists are engaged and thorough with that one. But eventually they are not able to come out with a specific solution, still bursting around, the fiscal solution, the incentive structure, this and that and all, and they're not able to really fight out what is called decisions. Now the question that has been driven me to work on this one, can this capital or global or corporate capital, whichever capital it is, capital-led structural transformation ever resolve the unemployment problem of a third world country like India? This is the basic question. This is the question I'm asking all. Let the mainstream economics, leading mainstream answer this question. Now, answer from my point of view is that no, it can never. The fact that as I said, you have the kind of recession that is there, great recession they call it. That is something which is there. Indian economy is very much caught up, they know very well, with the immeasurizing growth and all that. But still the protagonist of the liberalization, they keep on saying with unshakable faith that this is the market economy or something of this kind will be able to really resolve this crisis, which is never happening and will never happen. And the irony is that each successive political regime in a country like India, I'm talking about, drives the same policy prescriptions in different clothes in each successive year. And therefore, I do not see what is going to be different. I do not see a difference going to be there even after 5 years or so. The situation is going to remain the same. So I argue the logic of employment creation through the age-old prescription of capital-led structural transformation. Those are economic students, they know very well. This is the kind of thing which from Lewis model, this dual economy model that has been started. We have not been able to decolonize ourselves from that kind of thing. That kind of model, still it has been influencing even today also. And therefore, we are not able to get out of this kind of rot. We have been teaching the same lots to the students year after year and never looked into how appropriate this kind of a perspective to our material conditions of living, in which it's not possible for us to generate kind of employment we require for our livelihood generations, and so on and so forth. Now, I would rather argue that it's a continuation. Its continuation is nowhere different from being subsumed to the idea of development and strained with the colonial catching up culture that still continues. Now, we need to consider, it means, what do you mean there? We need to consider, I'm coming back to this point of niche construction, but before that, we need to really think about a new perspective. And what is the new perspective? The perspective that they have, the capitalist structural transformation, is something which is definitely not relevant to the country like India, as I told. But here, we have to have, if you want to have appropriate structural transformation that create can create productive employment, it is possible only through the construction of niche structure at the local level. And the two elements have to be given, two basic constituent elements are there for the perspective. First, we need to recognize the non-market forces as well. In other words, the prospect of employment creation at the local level is based on the working of both market and non-market forces. The mainstream economics ignores the non-market forces totally. But this is the real life situation, the non-market forces play that significant role. They're heterogeneous. They vary from context to context. Socio-cultural, ecological context vary from place to place. And depending upon their strength, they influence the market forces. We need to recognize that. For example, I'm just making it simplify the point. Tribal area, you go to a non-tribal area. It's a broad kind of a categorization. And you could see the difference between the two. And there the non-market forces and market forces, how they operate in both the situations are different. But what happens? The fallacious argument, the basic fundamental flaw with this mainstream economies that have been imposed for generations, for even after independence till today, is that this heterogeneity has never been considered. They consider this homogeneous situation everywhere as the linear conditions, and therefore the same model, same thing can be imposed on everybody, on everywhere. That is something, a broad proposition. Now, once the sources, both market and non-market forces are brought together, take, for example, I was hearing Professor Harilal's examples when we started Sarada's presentation. It's a fascinating in some sense, because here if both is implicit somewhere down the line, you have the market forces working. At the same time, giving a due recognition to the non-market forces. And the non-market forces and market forces combined to give the generative momentum of change. And that need to be recognized, and something which is very different. And therefore, once both the sources are factored together, economic structure will no longer be defined based on the quantitative relation between land, labor, and capital, which the economics mainstream economists have been doing. Capital will then not be given the leading role to determine the relation with other factors. The capital-led structural transformation in the mainstream economics, as I told, always uniformly they do it, and therefore we get into a kind of a trouble. And they say that every human being, species in the earth, rich or poor, affluent or deprived, have the same choice at the margin. It's a linear condition they feel. And the second factor is that majority of the Indians live in a need-based economy. That is a subsistence economy. I got an estimation that 70% of the total population in a country like India live in a subsistence economy some way or the other. Now, they do not have the choice at the margin. But this is completely bulldozed by the mainstream economics, and they want us to follow the perspective which they have developed and which they have borrowed again from the colonial past. Now we need to get rid of this one. I am making a very brief presentation on this one because the time is limited. Now, how do we get out of it, and what kind of niche structure construction that you asked about? Yeah, so this is here I have learned this from the law of evolutionary biology, this Encity, the construction of niche structure. Let me put it this way. And this is something which is very relevant to the, I'm just trying to understand, relate it to the experiences which Professor Harilal and other people, they have explained, let me see. And they should tell me that whether I'm right or wrong. But anyway, I have also looked into the radical transforming industries all over the world in many studies that I have come across. And based on those things that I have looked, I'm trying to develop this argument. The theoretical argument in favor of construction of niche structure I am developing is based on the Encity theory that has originated as a branch of evolutionary biology. It emphasizes the capacity of organisms to modify their environment and therefore influence their own and other species evolution. I'll put it in a context. It is defined as organism-driven environmental modification and differ from the standard evolutionary theory. That means the species, that is anything that you develop at a given point of time in a place, they not only they grow vertically, but horizontally they also influence the other species also. That is something which is very important. And then you need to really recognize the relational context, the totality of the relations between the people, between the different people and nature. That has to be as a kind of thing. And that is what I implicitly talk about solidarity. And this is different from the standard evolutionary theory. Not only does an environmental cause changes in species through natural selection, but species also cause changes in their environment through niche construction. What is happening in Kerala, if I relate it to that one, is something of this kind. So this is the species also cause change in their environment through niche construction. While contextually the Encity for structural transformation, human species, that's labor, living in the need-based economy, may seek to change the environment through constructing niche economic structure. Niche structure then evolved not only through driving human organisms to modify their own environment for improvement of their own welfare through employment creation, but also others' environment and other structure also improvement for the welfare through employment. They look for the other changes. In other words, what I'm trying to argue, it opposes the structural transformation in response to market forces that create differential survival pace and reproductive success through natural selection as exposed by the standard. The standard evolution theory, what basically it implies that is something what is called, survival of the fittest. That we know. But one thing I must tell you, that is what they say. Survival of the fittest was not Darwin's. Darwin never spoke about it. Darwin is T.H. Huxley talked about it. So if we really see that struggle for existence is Darwin's basic contribution, and struggle for existence is something which is based on the cooperation, that is everybody together to survive, to exist, cooperate. That is something which is implicit in that. And that is something not natural selection. And here, if you would strictly go by the natural selection, whosoever fits to the market, whosoever fits to the interest of the capital, gets selected, get job, get employment. But here, we do not want that kind of a model. We want a model of a different kind where it is possible for the rest of the people, for all, to generate a kind of situation of a livelihood or job or employment where it's possible for us to. And that is where the construction of new structure, the ideological backbone, the background is something that works very well. It is the relevance of this one. It is here. Even if
Could you conclude, sir?
hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello, I'm not able to see.
You can continue to speak. We are listening.
Okay.
Continue, no problem.
Okay. You can hear me, no?
Yes,
so,
yes, we can see you.
No. Even if private needs, I don't know what is happening here. Yeah, if I can see myself, now I can see. Yes. Are you able to see?
Yes, we can hear you also. Please continue.
Yeah. Even if
it should be nice.
Is it all right? Is it all right?
Yes, sir. We can see you and hear you.
Okay. So even if private needs are found difficult to be met primarily by the people living in the need-based economy, it's a basic question. The need-based economy. Basic question: the 70% people living in the subsistence economy. Basic question is that what kind of ecological relevance to the model that you are developing. The basic question is that whether the employment generation model is relevant to the 70% of the population. That is where exactly the basic concerns are. And if we really put them in the center of the argument, then the entire perspective will change, entire modeling will change, entire argument will change. And that is precisely what I'm trying to find out as to how do you justify a kind of a situation that I'm arguing for the niche construction structure, construction of the niche construction structure. So then, even if the private needs are found difficult to be met privately by the people living in the need-based economy, they can be converted into collective need. Niche structure, even in this respect, can be constructed that responds to such needs and create employment. Capital may be required at each stage as the niche structure evolves over time, but labor is assigned the primary responsibility to construct it, and by doing so, they bring about their own and others' economic improvement. It's not the capital to decide the fate of the labor. It's the labor, the people, the deprived. They need to decide. The people who are living in the subsistence economy, they need to decide what is to happen, how to go about it. That is something, and according to the need structure, economic structure evolves, and labor is assigned the primary responsibility to construct it. And this is, they bring out, by doing so, they bring about their own and others' economic improvement. It gives rise to the emergence of self-management. It gives the emergence of self-organization. Okay, now I'm going to finish self-organization. What is happening again? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Self-organization. Emergence of self-organization. That is something which is also the basic concern of this cooperativization. Self-organization then creates as a result of interaction between the organism and its environment. It gives rise to new structure that could not have been imagined initially. It is actually emergence of a new practice and behavior, a niche institution, which is considered to be one's best fitness landscape for survival and development in competitive environment. Finding the situation in the best economy, present context, for example, constantly propels one towards the point of self-organized criticality. The new internal system that emerges in response to the changing interaction between internal and external environment lays foundation for the construction of niche structure within the framework of comprehensive cooperation. As I told you, the solidarity between people to people. You know, there are enormous examples. Kerala itself is continuously what is called, it stands as the ray of hope, is the island of hope. Always, not only in Kerala, there are many other parts in the world. There are, in Rajasthan, for example, the dry area, which I've studied extensively, there are places where people were so vulnerable, especially during the drought time, villages after villages, they have no wherewithals as to how to really survive. But then they create the situation on their own. They create the condition for survival. They create the condition for their growth, not by depending on the market, not by depending on the government, by depending on themselves. And they create structure by themselves. They create a market even by themselves to see that how the market works and all that. I have documented extensively about all that. And so much so that you may be surprised to know when the people were running away from the place, they started having dairy industry in their own villages in the month of May by developing the pasture land in their own way. Now, how is it possible? And not only in one village, hundreds of villages they have tried to do, they did it. They succeeded considerably well. Now it has been possible. There are many examples that I can go on giving, and throughout the world, even for Medak, in Medak district of Andhra Pradesh, the literature which I have gone through, 50,000 women from the civil caste community, they came together. They have developed the situation, developed different types of institutions, organizations by themselves. And it is something lending support to the survival, to the growth, development, and so that education, agriculture, and so on and so forth. How is it possible? It's possible. And that is what they did. And all these things together give us, like Kudumbasri, that one, Kudumbasri, yes, in Kerala, yesterday, Miss Sarada Muralidharan explained. What a great example of that one. That stands out to be what's called a to testify the validity of the argument that we're trying to provide on what is called how important this niche creation structure could be there to lend support for the employment generation for the people who are semi-skilled and unskilled, and even the skilled people wherever it's necessary, something of that kind, that is important for us to underline those points. The niche structure in the form of self-organization are constructed by the labor in collaboration with the land, that's nature. It is the same as the natural resources. It is in the sense that why is it the nature? Why is it the land, nature, all this I am incorporating? Because it is in the sense the natural resources are not exploited by labor beyond the point it degenerates to find their new engagement in income generative activity related to production, distribution, and consumption. I do not want to get into the argument of the environment, nature, and all that everybody knows. It is going beyond the limit. It has already gone beyond the limit. And therefore, metabolic rate and all these arguments, and I'm not going to, I have done it in other places also, this is not the area, but the fact of the matter is that at the local level through the process of decentralized development, it is the labor and the great combination of the labor, that's people with the nature, that land, it is possible to use the resources to the point beyond which is not possible, because that will be point of destruction that will destroy the natural resources for regeneration. So the ability for the nature to become resilient, to regenerate, which should not be what is called destroyed. And it is the people that closely work with the nature and they can do this one. And they maintain these self-organization are no longer appendage. At the same time, you must remember, these self-organization are not appendage of the mainstream economic structure. They maintain their relative autonomy generated by the local integration among sectors. It is an endogenous growth process which is triggered in the construct of new geography of centrality and marginality. It also defies linearity view of causality between agency and structure. It is basically what the argument is, the reinvention of the workers' cooperative as independent creation of the workers, not as privilege either of the government or of the large capital that surfaces as an immediate option to choose within the framework of comprehensive cooperation. It can even take the support of the state, but being finally fully conscious that it is ruled by it. That is again the biggest problem. And you know the story of the cooperative development in a country like India, even China, for example. You know, this story is very different. It is again the state which really, takes over indirectly and try to manage everything. But the relative autonomy of the people, that's something which is completely different. Now the question is that it is completely this kind of organization, self-management organization, very conscious of this kind of thing. And the framework that it chooses to work is an integrated one, in that all farm and non-farm activities including services in any form, including education, health, business, marketing, processing, production, are all mutually inclusive. This all to be looked at the local level, while niche structure rests on divisibility of capital, its ownership is collective that valorizes labor. It's a very important, significant point which Marcus has made in 2015 in one of the significant papers. It is that it valorizes the labor. It is true that they are pushed to become their own capitalist by being bound by nearest market pressure, but self-exploiting in such situation may prove to be a better option than being exploited by others. So it is something I'm giving a parallel argument that you don't have to be exploited by the others, but exploit yourself to develop yourself in some sense. So it is kind of a thing, it's a managing by yourselves and all that. So however, the question is that are they going to be endangered by the onslaught of competitive pressure of large private capital? Perhaps not, but they are independent workers, cooperative enterprises, but not individual one. Their collective efforts that they make for the survival and growth may have a repelling effect on such competitive pressure and may never allow destroying their economic resilience. And besides, as mentioned earlier, state as a facilitator may have to create some space to mediate their prospect. However, this must not be understood as protection being provided by the state in the small to the small from the large ones. These cooperatives are conceived to work altogether in a different plane and characteristically different in their functioning and orientation, unlike the varieties of cooperatives countries like India and China that I have spoken about. Now, this debate has been going on the new cooperatives, and people have been talking about the new cooperatives. That, in other words, whichever form that you find, ultimately what matters the ownership and the people who are involved with that. And it is these people, the labor, it is the who decides, who determines, and is the capital for its own interest, the labor for its own interest. That is something that needs to be decided. And it is precisely here at the local level, the structure is, niche structure is constructed by the workers, and workers manage the business, trade, enterprises, and all that. I think is a different kind of a development scenario that is going to be generated. So the gradual evolution of the niche structure of self-organization over time may have a declining impact on the hegemonic control of the mainstream structure. It paralyzes the route through which surplus is extracted and lends credibility to the niche structure to evolve further at a higher level. It may also ensure better survival conditions for all and defy the principles of the growth and prosperity of a selected few who adapt to the new situation evolved through natural selection. So it is the natural selection that, and this natural selection thesis is the social Darwinism. They are only to justify the market predominance and the dominance of the capital, and to justify them. This is the kind of argument they have put forward, which is fallacious, which is strong, and not only that, it is something to be rejected. It's a false construction. That is something which has to be replaced by what's called this niche construction. That is niche construction theory. The deprived social groups were structurally compelled to the source of supply generation extraction by large capital by of generating low-paid jobs for them, as it is happening now, may have a now choice to leave such job. They can now exercise their choice to opt for a better one. Now, this is where last point that I'm going to make, and I'm quite impressed with the contribution with Delhi. He talks about that, what is called that, biophysical limits. Now, it is at the local level. Now, you have two limits. One is that you should not go beyond a point where people will be starving to death. You should try to develop within this point, so that, and at the same time, you should not utilize the resources beyond a point. So in that case, the resilience of the nature or the regeneration of the nature will be stopped. So within these limits, on the one hand, you grow, on the other hand, don't destroy the nature. Within this this is what's called ethico-social limit. That is, Delhi has explained that, although I do not agree with some of the arguments of Delhi in other respects, on the whole argument of degrowth and so on and so forth. But here, this point is very important. This could be seen as extremely important while the niche construction structure takes place at the local level for employment generation. But the employments get generated not at the cost of what is called, not at the cost of the nature or not at the cost of the dollar, but with the nature, with the people, with the solidarity between people and nature, it can be achieved. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Sunil Ray. I was just about to request you to conclude. So we have listened to all the panelists now. The floor is open for discussion, but I have a suggestion here, since Professor Steve Friedman says he has to leave in maybe in about 5 minutes. I can see in the chat box there are a couple of questions already for Professor Friedman. Could we have those questions first? Dr. Jose Chatukulam, I noticed that you have a couple of questions for Professor Friedman. Would you like to pose those questions to him first?
Sir, you can actually read it from the chat box, and then Professor Friedman can answer it. Okay.
Yeah, Professor Chatukulam has a question about South Africa. What is the party system in regional government in South Africa? And what kind of coordination happens between the central and the local regional governments? Professor Friedman, are you with us?
Yes, well, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah,
Can
we
you
can
hear
hear
me?
you. We can hear you.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions in the chat box for you.
Yes, I can
One is
see
about-
them.
Yeah. So could you?
The question you've just put at the regional level, and in fact, at the regional and the local level, in theory, you are dealing with the structures of the national parties. And this is the formal situation, and they're subject to the disciplines of the national parties. And people in South Africa tend to vote, the party loyalties are very strong. So people tend to vote on that basis. The de facto position is rather different. What you have at in some of the more rural provinces, for example, are what are called regional barons, who are party, they're members of the party, usually the governing party, but they build up their own patronage networks, which are responsible to them. And in fact, they tend to lead the charge in the governing party against the more pro-market elements. Not that they are not against the market, they just want a bigger share of the market. At the local level, you have a much more complicated process, which some colleagues have researched rather thoroughly. Once again, they are subject to, in theory, to the discipline of the national party, but in reality, they tend to have a rather opportunistic approach to the party, so that they will participate, they will go along with party policy if it suits them, and even with party affiliation if it suits them. But if they think that their accumulation activities could be better served in another way, then they don't have particularly strong party loyalties. So yeah, it's a very centralized system in theory, but in practice far less centralized than the formal situation would suggest.
Okay, Dr. Friedman, I think it's time for you to go. You said at 9:10 you would have to leave. So is it time for you to go, or would you?
Well, if there are any more, yeah, I think there was another question in the chat line, but I'm finding it a bit difficult to move my cursor for some reason.
Professor Gopal Karekudi has a question for you. Are there different types of conflicts, political, resource-wise, social status, etc., between the provincial governments, making decentralization difficult? Professor Gopal Karekudi has this question for you.
Well, I think what makes decentralization difficult, I mean, there is one province which is controlled by an opposition party. So the dynamics are a little bit different there. But what does make decentralization difficult is that where you have strong regional patronage networks, they tend to regard the local governments as in effect conveyor belts for their patronage networks. There is certainly a difference between the more rural provinces and the more urban provinces. And there's also a South African peculiarity, which is that under apartheid, we had these regional ethnic authorities which were set up by the apartheid government. And interestingly enough, the ANC, the governing party, which had fought these structures throughout the period of battling apartheid, absorbed many of them. So that you tend to find that former political functionaries in the old apartheid systems reinvent themselves as ANC provincial officials, and that means that you get quite strong differences between the provinces where there were these ethnic authorities and those who weren't. And that's what creates the urban-rural division to a certain extent, because the apartheid policy was that blacks were not supposed to be permanent residents of the cities. They were supposed to live only in these urban enclaves, and they were certainly supposed to enjoy some measure of self-government only in those areas. So there are certainly differences between the provinces, and the more urban the province is, the more likely it is that that some sort of decentralization is possible.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. I think we'll allow you to leave now since you have another engagement. Thank you very much.
I apologize. I did indicate beforehand I've got people waiting for me. And
yes.
if people have got questions, they can approach. I'll be around for the rest of the workshop, the webinar.
Okay, sir. Thank you once again. There are a couple of questions to. Would Jose like to ask those questions himself? Jose Chathukulam, are you with us? Regarding Sweden, there are a few questions. Professor Tonquist.
I can take them. I'll take them.
Have you read the chat box, sir? Are you familiar with the questions thrown at you?
I'm familiar with them.
Okay, sir.
Jose Chathukulam asked, what were the structures, institutional provisions that failed in Sweden in combating the COVID? Well, very generally, everything didn't fail, right? Sweden hasn't collapsed. But it's primarily the care for the elderly that has collapsed or has failed and caused the high numbers of deaths. It's also a lot in the public health sector and in the hospitals, and they relate. All the common factors relate to new public management. It's simple as that. This has been deregulations and competition race to the bottom to reduce costs for everything, and employ less skilled persons and temporary employment. They aren't properly educated on how to handle the viruses and so on and so forth. So it's new public management. When it comes to the coordination, it is that central government has decentralized responsibility for various matters, and also deregulated, including for storage of and for the provisioning of medicines and protective gears and so on and so forth. But it's not clear who is then responsible for it. You delegate it downwards, but it's not clear who is responsible for it. And when the central government is saying something like, we have to have testing, we have to do this and that, we will pay for it, nobody knows who's going to carry it out. So those are the major problem. And in checking this, of course, the basic problem is that our old kind of partnership governance, what was called social corporatism, has disintegrated. So unions are losing out, and other partners involved in this are not coming in and being able to check it up. That is, as far as I can. Is there a policy of complacency? Yours asked. Well, in a way, Sweden thought it had a solution on how to deregulate and to keep up a huge welfare state program while deregulating it and decentralizing, and it didn't work. And that was pretty wide agreement on these policies from centrists and rightists in the Social Democratic Party and all the way to the bourgeois parties. So yes, there are elements of it. Now there are growing concern, and there are commissions set up to try to look into this and so on and so forth. I had one other question which I thought was very well put, which was from Gopal Kadekori. Now, if there is a problem with the links, who is to take the lead to do something? A very good question. Of course, I don't have a the firm answer to that. But what I think one might, the only thing I can say is I think it has to be policy driven. I think it has to be related to redesigning certain reforms and policies, such as when it comes to the public health. And then when you have such a policy reform, you'll have to introduce, it has to come with bringing back the old type of partnership governance. Now, who is going to take the initiative? Well, just like the People's Planning Campaign or the participatory budgeting in Porto Alegre. It wasn't done, it was demanded from below, but it wasn't done from below. It was done from above. It was done by elected governments. It was done by a planning board. We have to have some kind of centralism and leadership to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I'm just looking at what other questions are here. Dr. Harilal, whether there's any attempt to integrate the district plan with the state plan?
Yeah. I'll respond to those two questions. Which
yes, sir.
One is the question from Jose Chattukulam. That is regarding the efforts to integrate district plan with the state plan. In fact, no, there is a beginning, and increasingly line departments in Kerala and the state missionary in general is becoming more and more sensitive to the local level plans and the requirements of local level plans. And the district plan documents that way is very, very useful. I can illustrate this in terms of the recent food security program announced in the context of COVID in Kerala. There is, in fact, Kerala depend quite a lot on other states for vegetables and many food items. We have chronic deficit in the area of food. But it was feared that supply will be affected because of COVID and related emergencies. And there can be shortages of vegetables and other things. Expecting this, the state government launched a massive campaign for increasing food production in Kerala, particularly vegetables and all. And when this is launched, see, there is a kind of collaboration, cooperation happening between state line departments of the state, agriculture department, animal husbandry department, dairy department, etc., at the state level, and the local governments. And they play a complementary role in the new food program. This is true of many other programs, even the COVID resistance against COVID, fight against COVID. A lot of work is assigned to the local governments as far as fight against the COVID is concerned. But then local governments will have to be supported in a big way in their effort to fight COVID also. For example, you have the first line COVID centers in the villages at the local government level. Many local governments are having this first line COVID treatment centers, but the healthcare services offered there, most of it is planned by the state health department. So there is close cooperation between the different tiers of government. And district plans are going to be very important in making state level plans by the departments as well as the planning board. We have made a good beginning, and it should be sustained in a better manner in the future. And then there is this question by Professor Gopal Kudakuri regarding the sensitivity of representatives at higher level regarding problems mentioned by Dr. Sanal Mohan, and certainly other problems also. No, I'm not saying that only the representative structures will be sensitive to problems of citizenship and other local problems. In fact, no, in many cases, local governments will be probably more sensitive to the requirements at the local level, problems of citizens. But there is a complementarity again operating at this level. And the problem of migrants is a very good example. See, migrants from other parts of India, they are citizens of India, but there is a problem when it comes to local governments. They are not having voting rights at the local level, and the local administration can be very insensitive to the citizenship rights of the migrant workers. And this probably had happened in Kerala also, like taking care of places where they stay, ensuring that the places where they stay can take care of social distancing norms, taking care of their food requirements, etc. Now, the state government had to intervene in making certain arrangements. Local governments were made responsible to take care of food and other requirements of local governments. And once that was done, it worked well. And in fact, no, the problem of food was fully taken care of by the local governments, and COVID treatment was taken fully taken care of by the local governments. There was no case of any COVID patient being neglected because they are migrants. There were, of course, instances where the local government and the local administrators should have behaved in a much more sensitive way. Now, similar examples can be drawn. For example, in the case of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in Kerala, you have a proportion of state plan, state budget earmarked for SCP and DSP, and a part of that is devolved to the local governments. Now, regarding the use of such funds, now it should be exclusively used for the benefit of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, one cannot say that all the local governments will be equally sensitive to this issue. Therefore, certain kind of state level monitoring and state level intervention is required to ensure that this money is properly used and used for the specific purpose for which it is assigned. Even then, there will be instances of misuse and all, which will be sort of corrected. So it worked both ways. Local governments as well as higher tiers will have to play a role, but you will have to remember the statements of Ambedkar, wherein we should realize that the rural areas cannot be, or villages cannot be treated as a depository of all virtues. You have balance of power in at the village level, and it can be highly exploitative at the local level. There is this possibility. Whereas at the higher level, in many of these things, the visibility is high, accountability is high. So there is a possibility of control at the higher level. Yeah. But it's a very, very interesting question to be posed in the context.
We'll move over to Professor Sanal Mohan. Any questions for Dr. Sanal Mohan? I can't see any questions for him. We'll move over to Professor Sunil Ray. Sunil, have you seen the questions in the chat box?
No. I have not seen.
Okay, I'll just read out one or two. Professor Sunil Ray, very good thought placed by you to combine market and non-market forces to bring a structural change / transformation, but generally most non-market forces are suppressed by the state as they are non-democratic, non-constitutional right, labeled as anti-national. Examples are processions, protests, use of freedom of speech, etc. Gandhian approach has no place now. I think that's more of a Professor Gopal Kadekodi's observation. I don't know whether you want to respond to that. There's a specific question, Sunil, from Jose Chatukulam. What you said is there in Kumarappa's economy of permanence, or people's economy with social solidarity. That is what we're trying in Kerala through some extent through the Kudumbashree experience. What you said I have seen in Sudan, Nuba Mountains along very primitive tribes. That also is an observation. You probably agree with him.
Yeah. Shall I react? Shall I briefly react?
Very quickly, if you don't mind.
Very quickly, these both the observations are very nice, very beautiful, very important and insightful. The question is that the state has always a tendency to suppress the non-market forces. That is something historically one can go with. And whenever it is accommodated, the state is the interest of the vested interest people, interest of the big people, interest of those who are powerful. They always mediate through the state. So therefore, whatever fits in, whatever suits their interest, they'll accommodate. If the non-market forces suits their interest, state will accommodate. If the non-market forces do not suit their interest, it will not be accommodated. That is historically true. Let us come to that point and let us see that what theoretically it is possible for us to look forward. Why is it possible for Kerala to make a breakthrough to a great extent? Kudumbashree is a great example, illustrate this fact. Why is it possible? Because the state again has really come forward to have a collaborative attitude or collaboration, or explore the collaboration with the local level, the people who matter, and therefore it's possible for them to really work out a common theme, common idea, the state and the people together. That is precisely what it's being learned from this one, the first one. And what Professor Chatukulam speaks of, I'm entirely agree with you. That is something as solidarity. Today, you cannot really degrade or reduce the importance of solidarity between the people to people. Especially, I am going to speak later on this whole question, the whole idea of solidarity. Throughout the world, these way things happening and all that is the solidarity. And therefore, the solidarity between whom? The depressed, the deprived people. Deprivation of different type, not only class, but also environmentally, say gender-wise, in any way, the deprived groups of population to be together, they express the solidarity with each other, to have a forum together to resolve the crisis they are facing. That is the kind of a dynamism, that is the kind of a model which is emerging. We need to really talk about that. And I really agree with you, with Professor Chatukulam on the whole issue of the solidarity that he is talking about. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sunil. Have we gone through all another question about Sweden? Professor Donquist, I'll just read this out. In countries like Sweden with highly developed healthcare systems where people live longer, is it any surprise that because of an older population, there's a higher death rate? Would you like to respond to that?
Well, they are just about as old in Finland and Norway. So I don't think that is, of course, it's not surprising that we have quite a number of people who are very old and pass away. But as I said, similarly, the situation is very similar in Norway. So it's a matter of how we have handled the home for the elderly and the healthcare system, and that really has failed. We can't get around it. It is The main failure is there, and it relates to taking care of the old people. It has less to do with our national strategy. The national strategy is fairly all right, even though everybody around the world keeps talking about it. It's our failure with the taking care of the old people. And it's not just a home for the elderly, it's also taking care of the elderly, staying at home and being serviced by people, you know, coming daily visits and so on and so forth to take care of them.
I wonder who would like to respond to this. I'll just read out this question. It seems interesting. In the UK and other Western countries, employee ownership trusts are increasing. Employee ownership trusts are increasing, which may be the answer to stop workers from being exploited by big corporate business giants. Do we agree with this?
I don't know, actually.
Acha.
We have, in any case, we have very little of it in Sweden.
Did Dr. Harilal respond to this question of Jose Articulum? Do you feel proportional representation system may be best suited and so on? Professor Harilal, would you like to respond to this particular question? Do you feel that the PR system of election may be best suited option for multi-level planning rather than the present one? He means multi-member constituency system, not single member. Professor Harilal?
In fact, no, it's very difficult to give a simple answer to this. There should be reforms, but when you think of reforming the system of election, then you'll have to consider different aspects. No, of course, no. Proportional representation is one option. But I don't think I can give a straightforward, clear answer now. I'll have to really think more about it.
Okay, sir.
Is it over?
I think so, unless it's almost 9:30.
Yeah.
I think we should
Yeah,
be.
we can conclude. Yeah.
Shall I conclude? I'll take a few minutes, friends, just to make my concluding observations. I think a few myths were destroyed in the course of this evening's panel discussion. The Nordic social welfare system, as exemplified by Sweden, with its universal healthcare, which ranks very high in terms of quality of life, health, education, human development, and so on, has cracked. There is loss of trust in government, central, regional, and local. Extensive public welfare with decentralization is not enough. There is also need for trustworthy and efficient democratic linkages, as well as coordination between institutions and actors. There is also a need for reinvention of democratic partnership governance. That's as far as my takeaway from the Swedish experience is concerned. Moving across to South Africa, in countries like South Africa, provincial and local governments have become sites of inefficiency and corruption, vehicles of accumulation and entrenching privilege. There doesn't seem to be accountability. There is democratic decentralization, but that has devolved powers to corrupt networks. A system of democratic decentralization exists on paper in countries like South Africa, but not in reality. But therefore, can one conclude that the experiment has failed and should be shut down, as some opposition leaders are asking? No, sir. Democratic decentralization should be seen as a work in progress, as an aspiration which simply cannot be abandoned. As far as Kerala is concerned, there has been an attempt to perhaps romanticize local democracy, romanticize local planning. This should not be done. one cannot ignore the importance of higher structures of governance. They should not be underestimated. And therefore, there is need for a balance between structures of democracy at the state level as well as at grassroots level. There is need for a balance between yes. There is need for a balance between representative democracy as well as participatory democracy. With specific reference to COVID-19, there's a strong plea made to rethink the idea of citizenship, both in India as well as elsewhere. The case study of the plight of migrant labor reinforces this argument, and therefore this is also well taken. And as far as Professor Sunil's paper is concerned, there is this flawed perspective of development planning in India, which didn't address serious issues like unemployment particularly. And therefore, there is need for a strategic shift towards construction of niche structure within the framework of comprehensive cooperativism, in which capital is not assigned a central role. Nonetheless, a combination of market and non-market forces are required. This niche structure has a lot of benefits. It promotes self-organization. There is a collective ownership. Labor is valorized. And the hope that capital and labor may not oppose each other. Now, these are my takeaways from this very illuminating panel discussion. I'm grateful to the organizers for giving me the privilege of chairing a panel with very distinguished people. A lot of food for thought has emerged. With that, I come to the end of my chairman's remarks. I hand over the microphone back to the host.
Thank you, Professor Jeevan Kumar. Now we have come to the close of the second day of the international webinar on cooperativism, self-management, and democratic development, decentralized development. Thank you all the panelists and all the viewers from across the globe. Thank you for your support and encouragement. Tomorrow, same time, that's 7 o'clock Indian time, we have this session on experiments in cooperativism, decentralized governance, and self-management. Professor Errol Sharp, the chair, will be the chairperson, and we'll have Marcela Vieta from Canada, who will talk on workers' self-management in Argentina, contesting neoliberalism by occupying companies, creating cooperatives, and recuperating autogestion. Then we have Dario Asilini from USA, Cornell University. We'll talk on factory takeovers for production under self-management, 3 examples from Europe. Then we have Professor Sabu Thomas, the Vice Chancellor of the Mahatma Gandhi University, who will be talking on cooperativism to manage COVID-19. We will have Dr. K. Girishan from Tamil Nadu, who will talk on from agriculture cooperatives to farmer producing companies, analyzing the transition of cooperativism in India. And finally, it would be my turn, Joy Element from Kila, to talk on the capacity conundrum, decentralization and local governance, how Kerala tackles it. So tomorrow, 7 p.m. Indian time, we meet again for the third day of our international webinar on cooperativism, self-management, and decentralized development. Thank you all once again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joy Element. You did a great job.